think a lot of people think that maybe some things that they've publicly stated could be used as evidence against them, and that's absolutely not true, and it's not appropriate, because these are public personas who say a lot of things because that's what their audience maybe likes or wants, and that's what gets them the likes and the followers. But that's not evidence of crime. That's not who they are as private people, and that's not what should be considered as evidence in a court of law.
I figure that many listeners will know a certain amount, but maybe no more. What's the current legal position surrounding Andrew Tate?
So last week, the detention order of the Tate brothers was ordered extended for an additional 30 days. The defense fought that, but the court ruled that they would be detained until the end of March. However, as to the two women that are also being detained along with the Tate brothers, the court last week ordered that they could be released on house arrest. Both decisions were appealed, and the appeal was heard yesterday. As far as the Tate brothers, the appeal was denied, and they are still continue to be ordered. As far as the two women go, that decision was unfortunately reversed. So the prosecutors are the ones who had appealed their release on house arrest, and they did prevail, and now the women will stay in custody until the end of March as well.
And what's the thinking behind this? There is a belief that he's a flight risk, and there is some talk from his camp that he would have gone off to Dubai if he had the chance.
Absolutely not. I think a lot of what is circulating out there is out of context. Again, certain things are sometimes leaked, but the entire conversation is not provided to give somebody who's listening the full context. And if you actually hear the entire conversation about the references to Dubai, that was in relation to a pre-existing health condition that Andrew has. And long before he was arrested and detained for this investigation, he had a medical procedure that was scheduled in Dubai. And so the entirety of the context of that conversation is that he says if he is released, he plans to go to the appointment as scheduled, and it's a conversation about that procedure.
Why do you think the court does regard him as a flight risk? I mean, is that the case that the prosecution is making?
Yes, that is certainly what they tried to convince the court of this time. And another factor also I do want to mention is, this investigation started close to a year ago in April. Since that time, the brothers have left Romania, I would say at least half a dozen times, and they've always returned. Although they weren't the accused at the time, they weren't specifically being investigated the way they are now, as in relation with the detention. The investigation had begun, and if they had anything to be concerned about, I don't think they would have returned to Romania. I mean, if they in fact were a flight risk. So I think all of those factors really weigh against the fact that they would go anywhere, not to mention that they're highly recognizable. It's hard to imagine where they would go that they wouldn't be identified. But that's certainly not what they were saying in the phone conversations that were used to convince the court.
How much do you feel that this is a case that's resting on a view of their personality, their character, their moral defects, their views on women, their behaviour outside of the criminal matters, and how much is this a case that is purely focused on the alleged criminality?
I think that's primarily everything that this case is. I think the file, and I can't get into what the file contains because these are closed proceedings for the time being in Romania, but I can talk about the fact that there is no evidence in the file of human trafficking. There's no evidence of force or coercion or forced transport or forced labor or any sort of deprivation of women's liberty, which is at the heart of any sort of human trafficking charge. And I'll reiterate the fact that they have been investigated for a very long time and they have not been formally charged. So I think what you said is absolutely true. I think a lot of people think that maybe some things that they've publicly stated could be used as evidence against them, and that's absolutely not true, and it's not appropriate, because these are public personas who say a lot of things because that's what their audience maybe likes or wants, and that's what gets them the likes and the followers. But that's not evidence of crime. That's not who they are as private people, and that's not what should be considered as evidence in a court of law.
So in your view, there is a sort of Andrew Tate character that he plays.
Yes, and it's not sure. I was gonna say it's not even just in my view. There's certainly interviews I've seen where Andrew himself has said, I say a lot of things. It's satire, and I've heard a lot of silly things. I've heard him talk about whether eggs are real, or the fact that he's existed for 5,000 years because there's a ninja warrior inside of him. And so there's lots of things I think he says. It's entertainment. It is this public persona, and those things are not all intended to be taken seriously.
But he does say things which are taken seriously by people in areas which is not funny and glib and based on something that doesn't matter. Women take responsibility for being raped. We all know the impact of what he says to a generation of young boys. It's often talked about this. Do you feel comfortable that whatever else is going on here, he has to at some point own up to the fact that some of the things he's said has a pernicious influence on people, and you can't get away with just simply saying, oh, I'm doing it for the likes, because that's kind of worse, actually. I'm doing it to exaggerate, because that's kind of worse, because the impact is very serious. And at some point, does he need to own that and accept that that's a bad thing in the world that he is contributing to?
Well, I think he has done that in large part. I think obviously a lot of things are taken out of context. However, I've seen, a video that he's put out about the 41 Tenets of Tate, and that's something that he has circulated. It's, he has slides, I think, and various videos, and he has put that out there because he feels that he's been misunderstood and quoted out of context many times. And I think it's important for anyone who's looking at his speech to go through his tenets, because those specifically, and those are thought out, these are not off the cuff remarks the way you get in a interview or something that could be taken out of context. These are specific things that he has given thought to and has said to clarify any sort of misunderstanding. And among those are, he talks about promoting loving consensual relationships with women. He talks about how he completely disapproves of any sort of violence within romantic relationships, and how women have, unique and really important strengths and abilities. So I think all of this talk about misogyny, again, there's a lot that is taken out of context, and I do think.
But there's a lot he has said. You cannot recast him as a feminist. You're a very good lawyer, Tina, I'm sure, but you cannot possibly recast Andrew Tate as a feminist. He did say women bear responsibility for rape. He has talked about the very much sexualization, the denigration of women. That's not all out of context. You can see it in his poses, the pictures he's posed for, some of the things he's said on social media, the videos that are then clipped and shared on those platforms. You cannot recast a man who says that as a feminist.
I'm not trying to cast him or recast him, and I'm certainly not here to comment or judge him for the content he's put out. I'll be the first to admit I haven't seen a majority of the content, but I have seen certainly long-form interviews where he has tried to explain some of the things that he has said that have offended a lot of people and that have been some of the most controversial things he said. I've also read and listened to those tenets. So again, I can't speak as to every single thing he said. And as far as I'm concerned, which is as his attorney in a criminal investigation, these things just are not evidence. And that's a topic for another day that could be debated as to, whether it's appropriate what he says or what he means by it. But that's not my role in this. My role is that these things are not evidence that should be used against him. The same way, again, I used an example previously about rap artists. You don't prosecute rap artists because they say things that, about maybe criminal activity or things that they might be talking about in a different context that could be used as evidence against them.
So is he a free speech in some ways? In your view, is he almost a free speech martyr in this, that he's being arrested and prosecuted in a certain area, but it's in some ways connected to his rights to be a character, to exercise free speech?
Absolutely. I think, again, his speech is obviously very controversial, and from where we sit now and what we've seen, there isn't evidence of the allegations that he's being investigated for. So why he's in custody at the moment, I'm not sure.
Do you like him?
As far as my own personal interactions with both brothers have been nothing but pleasant and respectful. And yes, I have no reason not to.
Do people in your life, Tina, say what you're doing? You're a lawyer, and lawyers are known for taking cases and representing people. But do people in your life come up to you and say, come on, Tina, there are many other people in the world you could be representing here. Don't represent this guy.
Fortunately, not the people in my life. I think they understand what I do, and we're not here to judge when somebody needs legal representation. We are here to keep the system accountable, and that's what we're doing in this case.
Do you think that whatever the results of this, he might need to learn some lessons though? Because I have a 12-year-old boy, and he goes on YouTube and he gets loads of Andrew Tate content. He only uses it to watch sport. He loves sport, but because he's a teenager who likes sport, Andrew Tate stuff gets sent at him the entire time. The algorithm bombards him with rubbish. I mean, I've got to be honest with you. It's kind of crass, glib, sort of this strange pseudo masculinity sort of mysticism. It's rubbish. And do you reckon this will be at some point he's gonna have to come out of this and think, you know what, maybe I've got this wrong, maybe I've screwed this up a bit? Do you think there's a chance he might come out of this a different person?
Certainly, this is a serious experience he's having in his life, and I think it will impact him. I don't know specifically what that impact, and I can't speculate as to what that impact will be. But to your point, as far as the rubbish, I do want to say that I think the overwhelming majority of his content is actually positive. And I don't think a lot of people would disagree with that. I think most people agree that he has a lot of motivational messages for young men, and boys, teenagers, and it could be applied even to women. It's really just about self-improvement, to be the best version of yourself and to live your best life, and to tell the youth that you can do anything you put your mind to. And I think that's really his message. Now, of course, there are the smaller fractions of what he says, which is controversial, and I think that is what most people are upset about. But again, I wouldn't cast everything he says as rubbish. I think there is a really positive message in a lot of what he says.
Just finally, then, what's next in all of this? There's an appeal now again. Tell us the timetable. What happens next, and when's the next thing that's going to happen?
So this ruling is still quite fresh. It came down yesterday afternoon. We are working with the Romanian legal defense team to see what the next steps are. As of now, the detention has been extended till the end of March. And of course, at that point, we will be seeking to get them out of custody. And for the meantime, we're working on the defense and everything we can to prove their innocence and to get them out of custody.
And if this goes to full trial, whether or not they're retained in custody, what's the timescale for that?
It will depend. This investigation obviously has dragged on for a very long time. It started in April, and now we are days away from March. So we're almost at a year. Trial could be anywhere from 6 months to a year later. It'll depend on how quickly everything moves from here.
Well, listen, he is a very controversial figure, and he's got a right to representation, and you've represented him today. So, Tina, I'm grateful for you taking the time to speak to us.
Of course. Thank you.